So William is not taking any more crap from Prince Harry and Meghan Markle.
No announcement came from Buckingham Palace, no press briefing, no ceremonial statement, but behind reinforced doors and encrypted briefings, a single decision reportedly altered the trajectory of the modern monarchy. It began with a financial anomaly. According to senior aides familiar with internal discussions, a $37 million cross-border development package, initially categorized as a media expansion initiative, triggered quiet alarms inside royal legal circles. At first glance, it appeared to be another high-profile branding venture tied to California-based production entities. But buried within the framework was language that suggested something far more consequential. This was not just a media deal, it was a relocation architecture. Sources later referred to the internal assessment file as Northbridge. Dated March 3, 2026, the 38-page briefing reportedly mapped out a structured pathway that could have repositioned Meghan and Prince Harry beyond traditional royal oversight, financially, legally, and symbolically. At the center of the proposal was a multi-year sovereign-backed partnership rumored to involve private Gulf investment channels. The headline figure, $37 million, was structured in phases: content development, international distribution rights, philanthropic expansion, and family-based branding integration. That last clause drew attention, because embedded in the expansion framework were educational projections, residency modeling, and diplomatic privilege consultations tied to long-term jurisdictional flexibility. Analysts reviewing the file later noted that certain language mirrored relocation provisions typically reserved for strategic expatriate agreements. Individually, none of it violated protocol. Collectively, it raised questions. By mid-March, Prince William had reportedly been briefed by senior constitutional advisors regarding potential implications under the Windsor Stabilization Accord of 2024, a framework designed to preserve custodial clarity and symbolic continuity for royal descendants operating outside the United Kingdom. The concern was not immediate defection, it was precedent. If executed fully, the $37 million framework could have anchored the Sussex household within a semi-autonomous international platform, financially fortified, diplomatically buffered, and structurally independent from palace leverage mechanisms. Then came the intervention. Multiple royal correspondents later reported that William, acting in consultation with senior legal stewards, initiated what insiders described as a containment review. The review allegedly examined trademark alignments, residual title usage, and cross-border representation rights connected to the Sussex brand portfolio. Within 72 hours, private communications were exchanged. What happened next stunned even veteran observers. Prince Harry, according to sources close to both camps, made a unilateral declaration during closed-door negotiations. If structural resistance continued, he would formally and permanently relinquish all remaining royal titles, including those not yet publicly surrendered, not suspended, not reviewed, removed. The timing was explosive, because such a move would not only redefine Harry's constitutional position, it would also eliminate residual institutional constraints attached to certain agreements, now including symbolic oversight tied to lineage branding. Was this leverage or liberation? Insiders remained divided, but one fact became clear. The $37 million initiative was no longer a private venture. It had escalated into a constitutional standoff. And as Northbridge moved from internal assessment to strategic confrontation, a second document, far more sensitive, began circulating within palace legal chambers. Its contents reportedly changed the balance of power entirely. The second document was never meant to leave the advisory circle. Referred to internally, according to palace correspondents, as Continuity Memorandum 12A, it was not a media analysis. It was a constitutional risk projection. Compiled by a joint panel of private counsel and Crown governance advisors, the memorandum examined what would happen if Prince Harry followed through on his reported threat to permanently relinquish all remaining royal titles. The findings were complicated. On the surface, voluntary title removal appears symbolic. But within constitutional frameworks, Symbolism carries operational weight. Titles determine patronage eligibility, diplomatic alignment, residual security coordination, and, critically, commercial proximity to the crown identity. If Harry severed those links completely, the palace would lose structured influence over how lineage references were deployed in international ventures. In other words, the monarchy could not restrain brand adjacency once formal ties were legally dissolved. That realization reframed the situation, because the $37 million framework, previously viewed as an ambitious relocation structure, now appeared as a bridge strategy. Analysts reviewing the proposal later suggested that the financial architecture may have been designed to function either with or without institutional affiliation. Phase 1 required proximity. Phase 2 did not. Embedded in the funding outline were clauses referencing heritage narrative assets and legacy affiliation value multipliers. While no explicit violation existed, governance experts noted that such language typically anticipates reputational transition periods, and transition was exactly what the palace feared. By late March 2026, quiet consultations reportedly expanded beyond London. Illegal observers in both California and Ottawa were said to be examining dual framework implications, particularly in relation to minor descendant designation and transnational custodial optics. At the core of the review was a simple but destabilizing question. If titles disappear, does leverage disappear with them? Prince William's reported response was strategic rather than emotional. Instead of issuing public resistance, he authorized what insiders described as a preemptive alignment freeze. This allegedly paused any pending cooperative endorsements, charitable overlaps, or soft diplomatic recognitions connected to the Sussex portfolio. It was not retaliation, it was insulation. Meanwhile, Harry's camp, according to sources familiar with negotiation dynamics, interpreted the freeze as confirmation that institutional integration would remain conditional indefinitely. That perception accelerated internal discussions about irreversible separation. Then came the complication no one predicted. A review of the $37 million package uncovered a timing clause. The sovereign-linked investment channel backing the initiative reportedly required structural clarity within 90 days. If affiliation ambiguity persisted beyond that window, funding recalibration mechanisms could trigger automatic reclassification from partnership to independent sovereign contract. Such a shift would move oversight away from cooperative structures and into fully autonomous international alignment. That detail changed everything, because it meant the palace was no longer managing optics. It was managing a countdown. Privately, advisors warned that a forced acceleration, either through title removal or funding reclassification, could fracture decades of carefully maintained constitutional balance between symbolism and sovereignty. Publicly, silence continued. But behind legal chambers, strategic models were running in parallel. One scenario preserving limited affiliation under revised boundaries. The other modelling a complete structural break. Titles dissolved, brand unbound, jurisdiction recalibrated. And at the centre of it all stood Harry, not as a secondary figure, but as the decisive variable. What few realised at the time was that a third pathway, quietly introduced during back-channel talks, would test loyalties inside the palace itself. And its architect was not Meghan. It was someone far closer to the throne. The third pathway did not originate in California. It emerged from within palace advisory corridors, drafted not as confrontation, but as preservation. According to individuals familiar with high-level discussions, thus a confidential alternative framework began circulating in early April 2026. It was not labelled as a counteroffer. It was described as a continuity realignment proposal. Its objective was simple in theory: prevent a permanent constitutional rupture while quietly neutralising the strategic advantages embedded in the $37 million structure. But in practice, it was far more delicate. The architect, sources suggest, Eli was a senior royal figure operating just 1 degree removed from direct succession authority, someone with both institutional loyalty and personal proximity to Prince Harry. This figure reportedly believed that outright resistance would push Harry toward irreversible separation. Instead, the proposal aimed to offer controlled autonomy. The mechanism was subtle. Rather than blocking the relocation architecture outright, the palace would recognize a restructured version of it, under conditions. Its titles would not be publicly revoked or surrendered. Instead, they would enter what internal documents allegedly described as dormant ceremonial status. Dormant did not mean active, but it did not mean destroyed either. Under this arrangement, commercial ventures could proceed, provided explicit lineage branding was decoupled from sovereign representation. Educational and residency decisions regarding the children would remain private family matters, but long-term diplomatic affiliations would require mutual disclosure. It was a middle corridor, a narrow one. Legal advisors examining the structure reportedly warned that its success depended entirely on timing. If presented before the sovereign funding clause triggered automatic reclassification, it could preserve leverage on both sides. If introduced too late, it would appear reactive and therefore weak. Prince William's position during these deliberations was measured. Insiders describe him as resistant to symbolic compromise, but aware of the institutional cost of total fracture. A permanent title surrender by Harry would not merely alter headlines, it would redefine how future non-heir royals disengage from the crown. Precedent was the real battlefield. Meanwhile, within Harry's circle, strategic fatigue was reportedly building. The containment freeze had slowed certain brand integrations. International partners were said to be requesting clarity on affiliation status before finalizing distribution commitments. The 90-day window attached to the $37 million package was quietly shrinking. Then came the private summit. Held away from cameras, away from official residences, and without traditional press leaks, the meeting reportedly lasted just under 3 hours. Present were Constitutional Counsel, financial intermediaries, and one senior family envoy authorized to explore the dormant title model. No transcripts were released, but 2 outcomes became apparent within days. First, the sovereign investment channel did not trigger reclassification at the 90-day mark. That suggested some form of provisional clarity had been reached behind closed doors. Second, Prince Harry did not issue the permanent title renunciation statement many expected. Instead, a single line was relayed through trusted correspondence. Discussions remain ongoing in the interest of long-term stability. An unusual word for someone reportedly prepared to sever centuries of hereditary linkage. Was it compromise or strategic pause? What remains undisputed is that the $37 million escape architecture did not collapse. It evolved, and as it evolved, a quiet recalibration began unfolding, one that shifted the balance not between brothers, but between monarchy and modern sovereignty itself. Yet even that recalibration concealed a vulnerability few analysts initially detected, because buried in the revised framework was a clause tied not to titles, but to succession optics. By early May 2026, the language inside palace corridors had changed. The word containment disappeared from internal briefings, and in its place came a new phrase, managed divergence. It was a subtle shift, but an important one. Managed divergence assumes separation without rupture. It acknowledges distance while preserving structural alignment. For the monarchy, this was uncharted territory. Historically, royal exits had followed 2 paths, disciplined integration or decisive exile. There had never been a durable third model, independent yet constitutionally adjacent, till now. According to senior constitutional observers, the revised Northbridge framework, paired with the dormant title mechanism, effectively created a prototype, not for rebellion, not for abdication, but for distributed monarchy. Under this emerging model, Prince Harry would no longer function as an operational royal. His titles, while technically retained, would remain ceremonially inactive. No state representation, no institutional patronage, no formal diplomatic engagement, but also no formal severance. Meanwhile, the $37 million sovereign-backed structure would proceed under reclassified terms. The investment channel, sources suggest, agreed to remove language implying jurisdictional anchoring. In exchange, Palace advisors allegedly withdrew resistance to certain international media expansions, provided direct Crown branding remained absent. It was compromise. But it was also evolution. The true pivot came during a private financial reconciliation session reportedly held in London. While details remain confidential, individuals briefed on the matter indicate that Prince Harry clarified his position in unmistakable terms. He did not want war. He wanted autonomy. And autonomy, in constitutional systems, depends less on emotion and more on architecture. By declining to permanently renounce his titles, at least for now, Harry preserved optionality. By allowing dormant status rather than destruction, the palace preserved continuity. And by recalibrating the $37 million package away from overt jurisdictional implications, sovereign investors preserved commercial viability without triggering diplomatic friction. Each side gave something. Each side kept something. But the transformation was undeniable. For the first time in modern royal history, a high-ranking member had engineered partial independence without complete exile. No dramatic abdication speech, no parliamentary showdown, no public fracture, just structural redefinition. And yet, even as headlines softened and speculation cooled, one question lingered among constitutional analysts. What happens if dormant becomes permanent? Because dormant titles can be reactivated, they can also quietly fade. If over time public perception adjusts to a world where succession adjacency exists without operational unity, as the monarchy may find itself operating in parallel realities. One ceremonial, one sovereign-backed, both carrying royal DNA. Prince William's reported strategy now appears less about blocking an escape and more about preventing fragmentation. By engaging rather than expelling, he avoided creating a constitutional martyr. By adapting rather than escalating, he preserved narrative stability. But stability in royal systems has always depended on a single principle: clarity. And clarity remains provisional. As of this moment, Prince Harry has not dropped his royal titles forever. He has paused them in suspended equilibrium. The $37 million structure has not collapsed. It has been recalibrated. The monarchy has not fractured. It has flexed. Whether that flexibility strengthens the crown or slowly decentralizes it will depend on decisions still unfolding behind closed doors. Because history rarely announces transformation in real time. It reveals it years later when the new structure feels inevitable. And by then, the escape plan is no longer an escape. It is precedent. But precedent in royal systems is never neutral. It accumulates. And 3 weeks after the dormant title arrangement quietly stabilized the surface, a disclosure, small at first glance, began circulating within constitutional advisory briefings. It did not concern Harry. It did not concern Meghan. It concerned succession insulation. According to individuals familiar with parliamentary consultations, a private inquiry had been initiated, informal, exploratory, and deliberately unpublicized, into whether future non-working royals should retain automatic succession positioning if they operate under sustained foreign commercial alignment. The inquiry was not targeted by name, but everyone understood the timing. If distributed monarchy became normalized, if sovereign-backed internationally autonomous royal branches could coexist while retaining succession adjacency, then the crown's structural gravity would weaken over time. Not through rebellion, through diffusion. This is the part few analysts discussed openly. The $37 million framework was never just about relocation. It tested a larger question: can modern royalty operate like a multinational brand without eroding its constitutional core? Behind closed doors, some advisors reportedly warned that if the Sussex model proved financially successful and reputationally durable, it could inspire a generational shift. Younger royals, present or future, might view independence not as exile, but as and upgrades spread. That is why the quiet parliamentary inquiry mattered, not because it sought to punish, but because it sought to future-proof. If succession optics could no longer rely on proximity, they would require codification, and codification invites clarity. Clarity invites scrutiny. Scrutiny invites modernization. Modernization reshapes monarchy. Prince William's strategy now appears in a different light. Blocking the $37 million escape plan was never the primary objective. Containing its constitutional ripple effect was. By negotiating dormancy instead of detonating separation, he slowed momentum. He avoided creating a dramatic rupture that would force immediate legislative reaction. He bought time for adaptation, time for recalibration, time for the institution to decide whether distributed monarchy is evolution or erosion. Meanwhile, Harry's position also reframes itself under this lens. By pausing title renunciation, he preserved leverage. By advancing structural independence without formal exile, he proved a model could function beyond palace walls. He did not drop royal titles forever. He demonstrated that he might not need to, and that realization may be the most destabilizing element of all. Because if royalty can thrive without operational monarchy, if sovereign investment can replace institutional funding, if public influence can migrate outside palace endorsement, then the balance of power quietly shifts from inheritance to infrastructure, and infrastructure can be built anywhere. The escape plan was never simply an exit. It was a prototype, a test case, a signal. Not that the monarchy is ending, but that it is entering negotiation with modern sovereignty on terms it did not design. History may one day mark this not as the moment William blocked Meghan's $37 million plan, nor the moment Harry considered dropping his titles, but the moment the Crown realised control no longer depends on ceremony. It depends on relevance, and relevance, unlike titles, cannot be inherited. It must be defended.